Can the South Carolina Gamecocks continue their 15-year dominance over the Vanderbilt Commodores, or is this the year that Clark Lea and his squad finally get back at Shane Beamer and his team?
You are Locked On Vandy, your daily podcast on the Vanderbilt Commodores, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Gamecock Nation and Commodore Nation, and welcome to this special crossover edition between the Locked On Gamecocks and Locked On Vandy podcast, where we cover your South Carolina Gamecocks and your Vanderbilt Commodores every single day. I'm Andrew Lyon, the host of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, and I'm pleased to be joined in this crossover show by Locked On Vandy host Corey Burton. We got a lot we're going to dive into on this crossover show, talking about the game this upcoming season, some big storylines surrounding Clark Lea and Shane Beamer. Are they both on the hot seat? What could Vanderbilt's quarterback situation look like with Diego Pavia entering the fold? And what could Lenore Sellers bring for the Gamecocks this season? We'll be diving into all of that in this show. But before we begin, I want to let you all know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as the playoffs wind down. The sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus. Daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Corey, how's the week been going, man?
Man, it's great, dude. This is fun, man. This is crossover number one for me. So I'm excited to get into this, man. It's I don't think I've ever, with this matchup, I don't think I've ever felt like the two teams were as equal as they are. I think Vanderbilt is a little bit on the rise, and South Carolina is going to presumably take a couple steps back, losing what they lost in Spencer Rattler and some of the other guys. But this is going to be fun season for both of our squads, and an interesting one nonetheless. But man, my week's been great. Summertime is good. It's hot outside. It's pool weather. Working on my tan, all that good stuff.
Yeah, no, speaking of heat, it's been about triple digits as far as the heat index goes down here in Columbia, South Carolina. It just is awful during this time of year. But like you said, it is summertime. Get to go to the beach, get to hang out with some family and friends. So that's always good. But yeah, getting back to the game, Corey, both teams are going through a lot of changes personnel-wise heading into 2024. And it might be a reason why this summer, like many summers in the past, analysts are going to look at the schedule for Vanderbilt and they're going to pick out the South Carolina game as one that, the Commodores might be able to get. But the funny thing is that South Carolina, they've won 15 straight games over Vanderbilt, and they're 29-4 all time in the series. So, Corey, why is it you believe that this is always a game that analysts circle as one the Commodores could get?
Well, usually, the SEC is so brutal that, I guess analysts view South Carolina as that team that's not quite on that upper echelon most years, and they always want for Vandy to pick off somebody, and it just seems like South Carolina most years is an easy target for that. But like you said, the last 15 years that prediction hasn't worked out in their favor. But I mean, this year I feel like this Vanderbilt team is way different than years past.
Yeah, no, and obviously that starts at quarterback, and we could definitely dive into that a little bit later in the show. But looking ahead at the game this season, Corey, obviously, neither team has taken the field for an official game yet, so we still don't know what both teams are going to look like until this game actually happens. But you look at the schedule, this could be a year where the schedule dynamic falls in the favor of the Vanderbilt Commodores. For South Carolina, they got two really tough games on the back end of this 3-game stretch where they got to play Texas A&M at home, then they travel to Nashville to play Vanderbilt, and then they play Missouri at home the week after. Vanderbilt, on the other hand, they got to travel to Jordan-Hare to play the Auburn Tigers the week prior, but they get a bye week after their game against the Gamecocks. So maybe a bit of a trap game for South Carolina. Some people might say, hey, Vanderbilt doesn't have the greatest home field advantage, but I would argue that sometimes having a game where you could be sleepwalking into it because maybe there's not much of an environment, that could be just as dangerous as playing in front of 100,000 plus fans in an Elon Stadium or maybe in College Station. How do you feel about the schedule dynamic for both teams?
Well, it's kind of brutal for South Carolina. You get Vanderbilt sandwiched in between A&M, who's going to be, I think, amazing under Mike Elko, and then Missouri. Yes. Luckily for y'all, those are both home games. But, Missouri doing what they did in the, the Cotton Bowl where they beat up on Ohio State.
Oh yeah, shut them down.
Game, but they dismantled Ohio State. I mean, they got Luther Burden. They got a lot of weapons. Drinkwitz is doing a phenomenal job there. So that is a game that I love seeing on the schedule right after this game, because all attention is going to be on, well, you might be licking your wounds after Texas A&M or coming in with a big fat head after beating Texas A&M. Either way, I think you're right for the taking in that regard. Plus you're like, oh, okay, we got Missouri in the up ahead. We're going to prepare for them because, it's just Vanderbilt, right? So those things, I love those psychological factors that come with this game.
Yeah. And when you look at it on Vanderbilt's end, I believe their matchup against South Carolina is going to be the tail end of a 6-game stretch, which, considering the fact that every team in the SEC's got 2 bye weeks in 2024, not just one, Corey, I think that's pretty brutal for Vanderbilt as far as like having to play that much of your schedule consecutively. The week before you play Auburn, they got to play the Texas Longhorns. And obviously Texas is going to come into the league looking to make a big statement. So this could be one of those games where, you talk about South Carolina, maybe they overlook Vanderbilt because of what they've done in the past. Maybe they do get that big win over Texas A&M, and that's a big one that helps them get to bowl eligibility. Vanderbilt might be on the other end trying to push their chips in the middle of the table and trying to steal one against South Carolina. So certainly could play in the favor of the Commodores depending on how the season unfolds for both these squads. And then when you look at it from the head coaching perspective, Corey, Shane Beamer and Clark Lea, I think it's fair to say this is a critical season for both of these coaches. For Shane Beamer, 5-7 in 2023, first losing season in his tenure at South Carolina, the 3 years that he's been here. And then for Clark Lea, 2022, kind of like the same deal for Beamer, ended the season great, 5-7, but 2 SEC wins over Florida and Kentucky, I want to say. Yeah. And then 2023, the bottom just fell out. 2-10, a lot of issues, it seemed, and a lot of change because of that in the offseason, that we'll again talk about in a few minutes here. But do you think it's more important that Shane Beamer doesn't lose or that Clark Lea wins this game between South Carolina and Vanderbilt?
That's a really tough question, but I almost say it's more important for Clark Lea to win, because I think what could possibly be at stake, because you have Virginia Tech, which they return a lot. It's a winnable game. Then you have Alcorn, Georgia State, and then you have Ball State on the schedule. I think Kentucky's right there, right for the taking too.
Yes.
And this game could mean bowl eligibility. So like you got a lot riding on it, right? You have completely overhauled everything for games like this, to where if there's something on the line, this is what we decided to invest in NIL for. This is what we did our major stadium renovations for. This is why we hit the portal so hard. This is why we got the strength guy that you wanted. This is why we went out and got Jerry Kill, Diego Pavia, and became the Vandy State Aggie Doors. But it is important for Clark Lea to win this game. Like you have to win this game to snap the 15-game losing streak, possible bowl eligibility, and to justify all the moves you made in the offseason.
Yeah. And, you kind of alluded to there, Corey, for both Vanderbilt and South Carolina, they have to look at the rest of the SEC. And the way that they got to look at it is, okay, which teams can we beat every year? And for Vanderbilt, there's a couple, sort of that bottom group of the SEC. Mississippi State, maybe if you played them. Obviously, Kentucky, you've played them really tough the last few years. South Carolina, every so often. And then for the Gamecocks, it's kind of the inverse. South Carolina might not be kind of right there at the bottom, but obviously they're not much higher than that right now. They're trying to climb their way back up. So, they might look at an Arkansas, Mississippi State, Vanderbilt, those same kind of games. For South Carolina, they expect to win those. And so for Shane Beamer, if he were to go out there and lose to Vanderbilt, be the first coach to lose to them since 2008, that would really hurt him as far as his job security is concerned. And it also would probably mean that the season has not gone very well for the Gamecocks as a whole, and there will be some massive question marks from at the end of the season. So I think it's fair to say, yeah, definitely important for both of these coaches. But obviously, as you just mentioned, a lot of change going on in Nashville this offseason. Jerry Kill joins the program. Clark Lea, despite being a Vanderbilt man, seems to be under a lot of pressure to perform this year. And Diego Pavia, one of the most accomplished quarterbacks statistically in 2023 in the entire sport. What could all that do for the Commodores this upcoming season? Corey will dive into all of that in a few moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks and Locked On Vandy. Today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience is the formula for winning championships and also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Welcome back to this Friday crossover edition between the Locked On Gamecocks and the Locked On Vandy podcast, where we cover your respective teams every single day. And as always, a big thank you to all of you everydayers who make the Locked On Gamecocks or Locked On Vandy podcast your first choice for South Carolina Gamecock or Vanderbilt Commodore sports coverage. All right, Corey, let's get into some team-specific questions now for both sides. And obviously, I'll start with Vanderbilt here because Clark Lea, there's a lot of talk around the hot seat for all these coaches every single year. And this year, it seems to be Sam Pittman at Arkansas, Billy Napier at Florida getting a lot of the talk. But admittedly, Clark Lea might not be very far behind them. Going 2-10 in 2023, have yet to be able to break through that wall and make it to a bowl game in his 3 years so far in Nashville. So, Corey, in your opinion, is Clark Lea on the hot seat heading into the 2024 season?
Well, after the final whistle in the Tennessee game, capping off a 2-10, abysmal 2-10 season, he was this close to being actually fired. But his seat, I think they allowed him to make all these changes and overhauls and things like that. So I think that bought him a year, but his seat is definitely warm. I think you have to win, worst case scenario, competitively win 4 games, right? And look competitive in your other loss. I think that's worst case scenario. Anything under 4 games you're out. And I think that, I think the ceiling's obviously 6 wins in a bowl game. But, given the recent what happened in basketball, I didn't think Jerry Stackhouse would get fired. Right. But he had a miserable season. And they booted him. Right. Because, hey, we're going to start investing in NIL. We're going to start investing in basketball facilities, and we need to see some return. It just wasn't working. And Jerry Stackhouse, good coach, good basketball mind, obviously great NBA player, just didn't work out at Vanderbilt. They gave him the boot, brought in Mark Byington, completely overhauled the roster there. You have to think, and then baseball made a bunch of moves on the coaching staff. So things are picking up a little bit where Vandy has always been kind of complacent with what they do. And so I think the seat is not hot per se. It can get red hot if you have another season like 2023. But I think he's bought himself another year unless it just goes completely sideways. But Shane Beamer, what's Gamecock Nation think there? I mean, I kind of believe with the way things kind of went last year that his seat is getting a little bit warm, maybe hot. Is he on the hot seat?
Yeah, Corey, I think it's fair to say that after 2023, Shane's seat is simmering right now. So he's starting to feel a little bit of heat. It's not like scorching hot to where it's like, okay, the seat is really starting to get warm, but it's also not cool either. It's kind of somewhere in the middle. I think that for Shane Beamer, you mentioned for Clark Lea, probably need to get to at least 4 wins. You need to be competitive this season. I would say for Shane Beamer, it's actually kind of similar. People look at South Carolina's schedule. They're automatically saying, South Carolina's going to lose 7-8 games. I really truthfully think South Carolina can win 6, maybe even 7 games, depending on how things fall for them this upcoming season. Yeah, it is absolutely a brutal schedule. There's no question about that. But for Shane Beamer, worst case scenario, let's say he only wins maybe the 4 gimmies on his schedule. If that happens and the losses are in blowout fashion, then Beamer might need a vote of confidence from athletic director Ray Tanner. That would be a nightmare scenario for him. But if he wins 6 games or more, maybe even 7 or 8, which I think would be the absolute ceiling for this upcoming season, then I think that he would regain some of the momentum that he lost throughout the 2023 season. But you mentioned an interesting name earlier that I want to bring up again, Corey. Jerry Kill. Man is a very successful football coach. Obviously had some pretty good years in Minnesota, but unfortunately ran into some health complications. So he kind of stepped away from on-field coaching for a few years, eventually landed at New Mexico State the last 2 years and made them a relevant football program, which pretty hard to do, no matter who it is that's leading that program over there. And now he's officially listed as a consultant for Clark Lea. So do you think that this is a case where Jerry Kill, he's just really come to Vanderbilt to try to help Clark Lea in some way? How did they get him? And if Clark Lea doesn't work out, could Jerry Kill be potentially the head coach in waiting in that spot?
I think all of that could be true because he's come in and he's really come in to mentor Tim Beck. I think when they hired Tim Beck and he was having health problems and he stepped away, I think that he had something building and brewing with Tim Beck at New Mexico State. And I think Clark Lea was able to, I think that dialogue was opened up when he hired Tim Beck as offensive coordinator. Now Jerry Kill is looking for somewhere to land, wants to come in and help the offense. And part of the conversation was Clark Lea was taking over defensive play calling again, which the last time he took over defensive play calling was 2 seasons ago. Then he kind of stepped back, was like, okay, I've mentored this guy enough, and it was a disaster. So he fired him and took back over. Offensively, also was a disaster, and fired that guy and hired in Tim Beck. So when Jerry Kill came over, he basically, they had the conversation. He's like, hey, Clark, if you need to focus a little bit more on defense, do it. I got you covered. I got your back. We've got a good thing going. And Vandy admin is like, okay, well, if this thing goes sideways, we could let go of Clark Lea mid-season if it came to that. I don't see a scenario where it possibly come to that unless they lose to Alcorn State. But
right.
They could theoretically put Jerry Kill in an interim, but I don't think Jerry Kill is going to be a long-term head coach for anybody because of his health problems. I think he's in a perfect spot where he is now. He did the same thing for TCU when they went to the national championship. And it's one of those scenarios where I think he's just there to help and he wants to make an impact somehow, some way. This is his avenue to do it.
Yeah, what was it he said after the bowl game this past postseason? Like, I could be sitting on a beach in Mexico, drinking margaritas and enjoying life, which I got to say, I mean, I think that's the kind of life anybody would want to strive.
As he was wearing a poncho. He was wearing a poncho.
Yeah, legendary clip and soundbite from Jerry Kill. So, yeah, definitely a good point there about the fact that, he might maybe step in for an interim role, but maybe it won't be long term. But going back to New Mexico State real quick before we get into another break here, Diego Pavia follows Jerry Kill and offensive coordinator Tim Beck to Nashville. Honestly, a kid that, Corey, did not get talked about enough at the end of this past season. Over 3,900 total yards of offense. He accounted for 33 total touchdowns, and he helped the Aggies, curb stomp the Auburn Tigers in Jordan Hare. There are not a lot of Group of 5 quarterbacks that can say they've ever done that. So considering the success and the pedigree Diego Pavia is bringing to Nashville, how do you think he's going to change the complexion of this offense and maybe the entire team as a whole?
Well, I think what Pavia brings to the table is his savvy, the intangible stuff, the knowledge of the offense. He's a tough kid, wrestler, understands how to manipulate defenses, will be a factor in the run game, things like that. I mean, he's a talented quarterback to boot with all of that stuff. But I think he's somebody that can bring people together. He can help get Vanderbilt in and out of bad plays, or out of bad plays into good ones. He can kind of be that translator from Coach Beck and Coach Kill to the rest of the team. And just the leadership qualities that he brings, I think he'll mentor the quarterbacks in that quarterback room. And he just brings a breath of fresh air to that team and gives them. I did an episode about Vandy having swag, and people were like, what? Swag? It's because of Pavia. Like whether they actually should have swag or not. I don't think that matters. Pavia just walks in the door and he's just like, hey, Vandy was 2-10 last year. Yeah, we weren't 2-10. At New Mexico State, which they brought over half the team, it seems like we weren't 2-10. The nucleus of the team now is all transfer portal guys, and a lot of them are New Mexico State guys. So I don't think they know that Vanderbilt is supposed to suck, right? So that helps, right? That helps, and he's the guy that's leading all of it, and I'm excited about that. But what's South Carolina going to do at quarterback? I mean, I know it. Spencer Rattler gets drafted in the NFL, and what's the answer there?
Yeah, well, for South Carolina, it's more likely going to be a redshirt freshman quarterback, Lenore Sellers. Sellers is probably the most hyped prospect the Gamecocks have had a quarterback in a pretty long time, Corey. Sellers is basically, if you can imagine building a quarterback in a factory, and all the different things that you would want. He's the exact kind of quarterback you would want. 6'3", 240 pounds, runs like some people report that he's running in like 4.5, 4.4 type range in the 40-yard dash. Can throw the ball 65 plus yards downfield. It's got an absolute cannon. Vanderbilt fans, unfortunately, may remember last year's game. Lenore Sellers, I think, basically made his own zone read play. He wasn't supposed to keep the ball, but he did. And he wound up running through 3 defenders practically for like a 36-yard touchdown run. So Sellers, Gamecock fans are hoping he's going to be doing more of that this upcoming season. Behind him is actually Auburn transfer Robbie Ashford, which could be an interesting dynamic there because Ashford, I would probably say he's not as good of a passer as Sellers, but he's clearly a good athlete. He brings some experience to that room. So he could still have a role in this offense, maybe in the red zone, maybe on some design QB runs where the defense is going to be able to key in on him a little bit. But if he's athletic enough and gets enough space, then he can make them pay still. So it's going to be interesting to see how they handle the rotational aspect between Sellers and Ashford, but I think Lenore Sellers is going to be mainly the guy for South Carolina heading into the 2024 season. But
that seems like, hey, before you go, that seems like the same dynamic with Vanderbilt because they signed the kid out of Utah too, Nate Johnson, who is like Ashford, a decent passer, can do a few things in the passing game to keep you honest, but he's a runner, and he torched Florida in the opener at Utah. So I could see a world where he has a package of plays too. So I think these offenses are built kind of similarly now, as you say that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point there about Nate Johnson. I remember, Florida just did not have anybody on that defense, athletically speaking, that could keep up with it. And that says a lot when you're facing a Florida Gators team that usually's got some dudes on that side of the ball when it comes to athleticism. So for you Gamecock and Commodore fans, you're wondering about any other questions that the South Carolina Gamecocks and Vanderbilt Commodores have heading into this next season, Corey and I are going to answer them all here in a couple moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks and Locked On Vandy.
Keep it locked.
Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much, I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sporting like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a bonus or a boost daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. For everyone in Tennessee and the state of South Carolina, I'm sure that the majority of y'all are big Atlanta Brave fans. And yes, they got some ground to make up on the Philadelphia Phillies right now, but the Braves are still one of the best teams as far as World Series odds are concerned, according to FanDuel, with their odds being listed at plus 900, which is the 4th highest on the entire list. So if you think the Braves can go on a bit of a comeback here, maybe win the division and go on a run in the postseason, that might be a good bet to potentially look at. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball.
Go Braves, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Go Braves. All right, 3, 2, and 1. Welcome back to today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks and Locked On Vandy podcast, where we cover your team in around 30 minutes or less. All right, Corey, continuing our talk about both of these teams, you mentioned earlier, Clark Lea is taking over the defense for Vanderbilt. Seems to be, I don't want to say full-blown desperation move because you mentioned the Jerry Kill aspect with Tim Beck being hired from New Mexico State. But Clark Lea, obviously, before he landed in Nashville, he was known for his defense as he was trotting out there with the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. How do you think that could change things on that side of the ball for Vanderbilt in 2024?
Well, for one, they're going to have an identity, and they're going to be physical, fast, tough, hard-nosed, players. They're going to have a plan. They're going to play games with you. They're going to move. They're going to crash gaps. They're going to do a lot of different things. They're going to get after you with a lot more aggression than they were. They looked like they were playing timid last year, and they just, for one, just having an identity alone will help things tremendously. He did a great job in the secondary, building through the transfer portal. And then I think freshman Dante Carter is going to be a stud this year as well at safety. So on the back end, they look really, really strong. And then they'll just kind of put it together with the front seven and just try to get after you. Now for South Carolina, there's some pieces on defense that I really like. Tonka Hemingway, Debo Williams are a couple guys that stand out to me. Shane Beamer and y'all's defense, is it going to be nightmarish like it typically is?
Yeah. Well, Corey, I think it's fair to say that defense last year it was not nightmarish. It was nightmarish, but it was for different reasons that Gamecock fans did not enjoy. I know that feeling. Yeah, the Florida game specifically, South Carolina, I think they were up 9 or 10 points with 9 minutes left in the game. They blew the 10-point lead. They gave up 35 plus points in maybe 4 or 5 straight games. It was not good. So defensively speaking, though, I do think things are going to be better because Clayton White, the defensive coordinator for the Gamecocks, the last month of the 2023 season, they started running this 3-3-5 defensive front. They actually ran it against Vanderbilt. That was the first game that they just flat out committed to that defensive scheme. It worked really well, so they decided, okay, well, it worked well against Vanderbilt. Let's try it against Kentucky. Held them to 10 points. And granted, Kentucky wasn't a world-beating offense, but still about middle of the pack nationally speaking. And then Clemson, it kept them in that ball game despite how porous the offense was in the final game of the regular season there. So the defensive scheme is going to be a bit different. They'll run a bit of nickel or 4-2-5 and 3-3-5 schematically. And then they get Dylan Stewart, 5-star out of the Washington, D.C. area from the 2024 class. A lot of people think that he could be a star for this team immediately. Nick Emenworry, third-year starter at the safety spot. In my opinion, one of the best safeties in the SEC. Will likely get drafted this next April. He's going to be a stud back there. Linebacker could be better. You mentioned Debo Williams. Demetrius Knight Jr. is another guy to watch there, along with the Bam Martin Scott. All in all, I think the defensive front is definitely going to be better for South Carolina, and I think they'll have enough in the secondary to where I think the defense is definitely going to make some strides this next season. Now, Corey, one last thing for you before we head on. If there's one player on Vanderbilt's team that you think could surprise some people in the SEC this upcoming season, who do you think that could be?
Surprise? I think it'll be Cedric Alexander, the running back. He's going to get increased workload. He's a weapon. He'll be a sophomore. I think he's ready for a breakout year. I think he'll surprise a lot of people.
Gotcha.
What about you? What about South Carolina? Who's the person that everybody else needs to be watch out for that we don't really know about?
Yeah, I think for South Carolina, the player that teams are going to need to watch out for, I'm really high on this kid. I might be sort of on an island with this take, but I think Dalvin Campbell, transferred from Nevada, coming to South Carolina this offseason. Now, the stats from last season won't pop off the screen for you. He had 31 catches for about 531 yards, but he played on a very bad Nevada team, a team that went about 2-10. Quarterback, I think, was basically inaccurate on over 50% of the throws that he put his way, according to Pro Football Focus. But Dalvin Campbell, in my opinion, is going to help South Carolina offset the loss of Xavier Legette, big deep ball threat that played for the Gamecocks last year, moved on to the NFL, got drafted by the Carolina Panthers. So I'll enjoy watching him play for the blue and black up there. But for Dalvin Campbell, 6'4", 215's got some track ability, got really good release off the line of scrimmage, and he was used to having to make contested catches in that Nevada offense. So because of that, I think he'll be a perfect complement to Lenore Sellers and being able to just say, hey, just throw it up for me, big man, and I'll go up there and get the football. You don't have to be completely spot on with it. So I definitely think he's going to be a guy to watch for the Gamecocks in 2024. But
yeah, people get wrapped up in the stats, man. I don't understand that. It's all about skill set and how you can fit into the offense, honestly. And if you feel like it's a good skill set, it'll work. The stats will take care of themselves. So.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely agree with you on that point, Corey. But with that being said, that's going to do it for today's crossover edition between the Locked On Gamecocks and Locked On Vandy podcast. Both Corey and I really appreciate each and every one of you South Carolina Gamecock and Vanderbilt Commodore fans for watching or listening to this show today. Corey, for the Gamecock fans that are maybe interested in some more information on Vanderbilt, where can they find all your work?
At Locked On Vandy on all social media platforms, my YouTube channel. They can find me personally at Coach Burton 36 on X, and at Coach Corey Burton on Instagram as well. And you can find every bit of my work in those places.
Yeah, and for you Vanderbilt fans, if you're interested in more information on South Carolina, of course, you can follow the Locked On Gamecocks podcast on YouTube or wherever you get your audio podcast daily. You can find me on X at @A_line_SC. But for all you Gamecock fans and Commodore fans, thank you all so much once again for tuning in. Have a great rest of your Friday, and we'll be sure to catch y'all on our next shows right here on the Locked On Gamecocks and Locked On Vandy podcasts.
Have a great weekend.